I've always been weird in my family, a white crow and all that. I'm Brigida Mariani, I'm 29 years old, but for as long as I can remember, I've felt like I didn't fit in. I was the eldest child in a family where both parents, Rachel and Cecilio Mariani, were doctors, respected, wealthy people, immersed in their profession and in public opinion about themselves, and it seemed that their careers and reputations always meant more to them than anything else. Yes, my parents were big shots in the medical world, but despite that, none of their privileges or attention ever got to me. All the best things, from gifts to the most basic expressions of care, invariably went to my younger twin brothers, Fedel and Ezelin. From the very moment they were born, instantly occupied all the space, all the love, all the pride of my parents, and I became an invisible shadow in their lives, existing somewhere in the background of their perfect family portrait. At first it was small things, almost imperceptible details, but over time they accumulated more and more, until it turned into a suffocating feeling that I didn't even exist. I remember when I was 10 years old, I had long hinted to my parents that I wanted to try drawing, that I liked paints, that I could spend hours looking at paintings in shop windows, dreaming one day to create something of my own, alive, real. That winter, I noticed a painting kit in one of the stores. Nothing special, just a few decent brushes and paints, but for me it was something huge, something meaningful, and I hoped that at least on my birthday, my parents would hear me. And so, the long-awaited day has come. I'm holding my breath, tearing open the wrapper, and what do I find? The damn math book. They didn't even try to remember what I wanted, they didn't ask what would make me happy, it didn't matter to them. Things have only gotten worse over the years. If in childhood I just got simpler gifts or smaller portions of dessert, then in adolescence it finally became clear that my opinion and my desires did not mean anything at all. Family trips were the best proof of this. If Fedel wanted to ski, we went to the mountains. If Ezelin suddenly decided that he wanted to learn surfing, then, of course, the whole family went to the coast. They didn't even listen to my suggestions, and if I dared to remind them of myself, my parents just nodded absently, and then did as the boys wanted. But perhaps the most painful moment was the question of college. When I was 17, I finally fell in love with art, in particular, the restoration of old works. I could wander around the museum for hours, pestering the staff with questions about how they restored paintings, what techniques they used, and what paints were popular hundreds of years ago. I felt like I had found my purpose. However, when I brought it up over a family dinner, you'd think I'd announced my intention to run away with a traveling circus. Restoration of works of art? Mom laughed, putting down her fork. Brigida, be realistic. It's not a real job. Yes, Brigida, Fedel added with a smug grin. Why don't you do something useful? For example, to become a doctor. I saw how proud his parents were of him for these words, how they looked at him with admiration, with such warmth that they had never felt for me. But despite their dislike of my choice, I was determined to get my way. When the enrollment letters started coming, I was over the moon to learn that I had received a scholarship to study art restoration. I ran into the kitchen, waving the letter, my soul rejoiced. I felt important, valuable, but, of course, this feeling did not last long. Mom, Dad. I blurted out, barely catching my breath. I got a scholarship. Mom barely looked up from her medical journal, looked at me briefly and said with slight indifference. That's sweet, honey. Did you hear that the boys got top marks in the exams? And everything. All I heard at that moment, all I felt, was an icy pang of disappointment. They didn't even pretend to be happy for me. The day I left for college was completely different from what it was for my brothers when they went to study 2 years later. They got farewell parties, long speeches about how proud they were, and their father even drove them to campuses in person. What about me? I packed up my used laptop and several sets of clothes from the thrift store and headed to the bus stop alone because my parents didn't even have time to give me a ride. But there was one person who really saw me. A man who had never played these family games, who knew that I was not a mistake, not a shadow, not an extra person in the house. My grandmother, Elizabeth. She showed up that day when I was standing with my suitcase at the bus stop, and right before I was about to leave, she took me aside. "Brigida, honey," she said, squeezing my hands in her warm, wrinkled palms. "I'm so proud of you. Never forget that." She put a small envelope in my hand, and when I opened it, I found a check. Not enough money to change my life, but enough to make my way a little easier. But the most important thing was that there was more than just money in that envelope. It was proof that at least someone in my family saw me, understood me, recognized my choices, my dreams, and did not consider them an empty fantasy. It was the first time in my life that I felt like I really mattered to someone. The fact that she actually noticed me meant everything, so college was kind of a mixed bag for me. On the one hand, I was finally freed from the constant comparison with Fidel and Eslin. I could really immerse myself in my studies without feeling like a participant in some endless competition for my parents' attention, where I was not destined to win anyway. But on the other hand, there was little money, very little, and I had to literally survive, making ends meet on my modest scholarship and endless part-time jobs. I'd heard about all the fancy things my brothers were doing, from rare family calls, from social media, from acquaintances who still moved in our family circles, lavish student parties, spring break trips to the craziest places, internships at prestigious clinics that my parents, of course, paid for. No questions asked. What about me? I lived in a tiny dorm room, worked in the library at night, worked part-time in a small cafe on weekends, saved on everything I could, and nevertheless, I did not regret my choice for a second, because the restoration of works of art became for me not just a career path, but something much more than could be expressed in words. My refuge, my salvation, my way to give back to the world the beauty hidden under layers of neglect and time. There was something almost magical about touching old, forgotten things, seeing how gradually, layer by layer, their original essence returned to them, the hidden potential that once seemed lost, and maybe that's why I clung to this art so much, because, according to in fact, I did with paintings and statues what I so desperately wanted someone to do to me someday, to see my worth, despite the years of oblivion and invisibility. In my last year, I finally got lucky. I got an internship at a small but respected museum. It wasn't something fashionable or prestigious. It wasn't like the fantastic internships my brothers could boast of, but it was art. It was my chance, even if my duties were mostly cleaning, organizing archives, and endlessly working with documents. But I felt like I belonged. I felt like I was finally doing something important. And, of course, I couldn't help but share this news with my parents, despite the fact that somewhere deep down I already knew what their reaction would be. When I called home, my mom answered after a few rings. Her voice was distracted, as if I had interrupted something more important than a conversation with my daughter. "Mom," I began, trying not to lose my enthusiasm, "I have amazing news. I got an internship at the museum." "Oh, how sweet, darling," came the reply with almost automatic approval. "Have you heard that Fidel's scientific work is published in a major medical journal?" I held back a sigh, swallowed the resentment, habitually hid it somewhere deep inside, so that it would not break out, not poison this moment, which meant so much to me, and for her it was just a minor episode that could easily be ignored. "That's great, Mom," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "Listen, I was thinking maybe I should come home for the weekend. We could." "Oh, I'm not sure that's a good idea," she interrupted me with a slight haste, as if she was afraid I would finish the sentence in time. "Your father and I will be very busy. We are helping the boys with their research, you understand." "I understand." "Of course, I understand." As always. I hung up the phone and felt the familiar mixture of anger and pain begin to creep inside, but this time there was something else, a small spark of defiance, a subtle sense of determination. I looked around my tiny room, at the art books stacked haphazardly on the table, at the half-finished restoration projects sprawled on the floor, and realized that this was my world, my own, created by me, without their participation, without their approval, without their money and privileges. To hell with them, I muttered to the empty room. I don't need their confession. But even as I said those words, I knew it wasn't entirely true. No matter how I tried to deny it, no matter how I convinced myself that their opinion no longer mattered to me, there was still hope in the depths of my soul, tiny, almost imperceptible, but still alive. I hope that someday they will see me. Graduation day came and went, leaving no special traces in the family history. There was no celebration, no solemn speeches, no tears of pride, just a short, almost formal dinner at some chain restaurant, where the parents ordered dishes without looking up from their phones, and the brothers had lively conversations about their scientific achievements. "So, Brigitte, what's next?" my father asked, barely looking up from the menu. I straightened up, trying to sound confident. "Actually, I got a job offer at one of the museums in New York." My father frowned. "I do not know, Brigitte. New York is an expensive city. How much will they pay you there?" I felt the blood rush to my face when I had to mumble the amount, which, of course, seemed insignificant compared to the prospects my brothers had. The disappointment in their eyes was quite obvious. The rest of the dinner was spent in thinly veiled criticism and regular comparisons with the academic triumphs of Fedel and Ezelin. I ate in silence, no longer trying to prove anything, because I realized a long time ago that it was pointless. But when we left the restaurant, Grandma Elizabeth took me aside, squeezed my hands tightly and, looking into my eyes, whispered, "Don't let them darken your light, my dear." She put a small envelope in my hand, and I immediately realized what was inside. "Go to New York. Pursue your dreams." I opened the envelope and saw a receipt, enough money to cover at least the first month of rent in the city. I hugged her tightly, trying not to cry. The next few years were crazy. I completely immersed myself in my work, slowly but surely making a name for myself in the world of art restoration. The days merged into one endless stream of lectures, practice, and long hours in archives and workshops, where I learned how to restore paintings darkened by time, revealing hidden layers of color and life that were once considered lost. I worked in small museums, took on private commissions, and sometimes spent nights working on projects for which I was barely paid, but which brought invaluable experience and allowed me to dive deeper into my favorite business. It was at this time that I met Clementi. Clementi was an aspiring graphic designer with a sweet smile, endless patience, and that infectious passion for his work that kept him talking for hours about colors, composition, typography, inspiration, and creative search. We immediately found a common language, united not only by our love for art, but also by the feeling that we were both outsiders in our fields, those who had to prove our worth in a world where completely different professions were valued, those who chose a path that did not promise easy money and stability, but was the only thing that really made us happy. We dated for several years, and when our relationship became serious, I decided it was time to introduce Clementi to my family. I didn't expect them to be enthusiastic, but I still hoped that they would at least try to show interest, at least pretend to be happy for me. But as soon as we sat down at the table, it became obvious that my parents had completely different ideas about what the man in my life should be like. They bombarded Clementi with questions, each of which was sharper than the previous one, hiding their wariness with polite smiles and ostentatious interest. "Well," my father began, trying to sound casual, but without success. "What exactly are your long-term career prospects, Clementi?" I felt Clementi shift slightly in his seat, noticing the tension in my father's voice, but he tried to remain confident. "I'm building up my customer base," he replied. "It takes time, but I'm making progress." Mom immediately intervened. Her voice was soft, but there was a distinct coolness in it. "And your current income, is it enough to support your family?" I felt my face turn red. "Mom, this is—" "It's okay, Brigitte," Clementi said softly, squeezing my hand under the table. "Dr. Mariani, I'm not where I want to be yet, but I'm working hard to achieve it." The interrogation continued throughout the dinner. With each new question, I saw Clementi becoming more tense, his confidence fading under the weight of hidden pricks, and my anger, on the contrary, flared up more and more. My parents didn't try to get to know him as a person, they didn't care what made him happy, what his dreams were, or why we loved each other. All they cared about was how well he fit their vision of success. When dinner came to an end, Mom pulled me aside while Clemente helped the waiter collect the plates. "Brigida, dear," she said, looking at me with an expression of sympathy that seemed almost sincere. "I know you think you care about this boy, but you need to be realistic. You've already chosen a difficult career path. Don't make things worse by getting attached to someone who doesn't have a real future." I recoiled, shocked by such directness, but then my father intervened in the conversation. "Your mother is right, Brigida," he said, folding his arms across his chest. "You need to think about your future. This Clemente seems like a nice guy, but is he really good enough for you? You could have done much better." I stood there, unable to utter a word, as years of pent-up frustration threatened to burst through. How dare they judge Clemente? How dare they question my choice again? When Clemente and I started planning our wedding, reality hit us harder than we expected. Our shared savings were modest, barely enough for a simple ceremony, and one night, after several hours of looking at the budget tables, I gritted my teeth and decided to talk to my parents about it. "Mom, Dad," I began hesitantly during our weekly phone conversation. "Clemente and I have set a date for the wedding. We're trying to cut costs, but I thought, maybe you'd like to help a little. At least just with planning." The silence on the other end of the line was so long and awkward that I was already beginning to regret my words. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice as cold as ice. "Brigida, you're an adult now. If you decide to marry this man, then you need to deal with the consequences yourself." I exhaled slowly and hung up the phone. I felt terrible, but I wasn't surprised. It was so predictable. Grandma Elizabeth intervened again to save the day. When I told her about the situation, she didn't even hesitate. "My dear," she said in her warm voice over the phone, "I may not be able to arrange the wedding of your dreams for you, but I want to help make your day special." A few days later, she sent some money, which, of course, was not enough to radically change our plans, but it turned out to be enough to ease the situation a little. The wedding day arrived, and I had a mixture of excitement and nerves in my stomach. The community center we rented was simple but looked beautiful, decorated with wildflowers and twinkling lights. Our small group of friends helped us with everything from decorations to homemade cake. As I walked down the makeshift aisle, Clemente's face lit up with a smile that made all the effort worthwhile for a moment. I forgot about everything else, the stress of money, that my family were jerks, and just immersed myself in the love coming from his eyes. The bubble burst as soon as I saw my family. Mom and Dad were sitting in the front row, tense and with obvious disgust on their faces. I heard my mother muttering to my father about tasteless decorations and cheap food. Fidel and Ezelyn were even worse. They were giggling in the corner, buried in their phones, and, apparently, were not at all ashamed of their blatant disregard. I tried to ignore them, focusing on our vows and the supportive faces of my friends, but somewhere inside me, a tornado of resentment and anger was already swirling. It wasn't until the next day that I realized how violent they could be. I woke up to dozens of notifications on my phone. Ezelyn posted a bunch of unflattering photos from the wedding on social media. "Congratulations to our big sister on her special day." I read the caption under the blurry picture of Clemente and me cutting our homemade cake. "Nothing speaks about true love like a dollar store wedding." In another post, he posted a photo of our buffet table, and next to it was a picture of an exquisite dish from some elite restaurant. "Brigida's wedding is compared to our usual dinner on Tuesday. Guess which one is which?" The comments section resembled a war zone. Some relatives were shocked by his brother's behavior. "This is completely unacceptable. You should be ashamed of yourself," Aunt Sarah wrote. But others seemed to find it funny. "It's cruel, but it's true. This wedding was like a homeless convention," commented our cousin Tim. I felt like I was getting sick when I read these comments. But what really broke my heart was my parents' reaction. Instead of chastising their sons for outright rudeness, they encouraged their behavior. Oh, boys are boys. It's just harmless entertainment, Mom wrote. I did not call them and did not demand an apology. I just decided to forget about them for a while. 6 months have passed since the wedding, and the moment I was both waiting for and dreading has arrived, the annual Mariani family reunion. Clemente thought I should go, hoping it might be a chance to clarify the situation, but oh, how wrong we were. The tension in the air was so thick that it could have been cut with a knife. I tried my best to be polite, have casual conversations, and avoid my immediate family as much as possible, but then I heard Fidel bragging about his last luxury vacation, which was, of course, fully paid for by our parents. Something inside me just snapped. It must be great, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, when Mom and Dad finance your life. There was a dead silence in the room. Fidel stared at me, his mouth hanging open in surprise. What's that supposed to mean? What is it? He asked, frowning. You know perfectly well what that means. I felt a wave of anger rise inside me, a wave that had been accumulating for years, and now it had nowhere else to go. You and Ezeline got everything on a silver platter, and I had to fight for every bit of recognition or support. Mom stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. Brigitte, you're being ridiculous. We have always treated you children the same. I laughed bitterly. The same? Are you kidding? Let's talk about equal terms, okay? I started counting on my fingers, trying to stay calm, but every word came with a huge effort, because everything inside me was boiling with rage. Private school for boys is 1, public school for me is 2, new cars for their 16th birthday are 3, nothing for me is 4, and let's not forget the main achievement, $300,000 for their Ivy League medical education, while I had to make ends meet relying on scholarships and loans. It was so quiet in the room that you could hear a pin drop. Everyone froze, watching our family's dirty laundry, which was now so publicly unfolding in front of them. Mom's voice was icy when she finally spoke, not hiding her contempt and condescending mockery. If you're so obsessed with money, Brigitte, maybe you should have married someone rich instead of your poor husband. Her words hit me in the heart like a cruel, sudden punch in the gut, making me speechless for a moment. I felt Clemente, who had been standing silently next to me and squeezing my hand tightly as a sign of support, tense up, his back straightened, and his fingers squeezed my palm a little harder, as if he himself was fighting the urge to respond to her with the sharpness she definitely deserved. How dare you? I hissed, feeling tears sting my eyes, but not letting them break out. I won't let her see me as weak. Clemente is worth 10 people like you. He loves me not for how I can raise his status among his friends from the country club, but for who I am. At that moment, the evening completely got out of control. The reunion turned into a real chaos. Someone was whispering, someone was openly accusing, old grievances surfaced, and anger and irritation multiplied like a snowball. The voices grew louder and louder, turning into a cacophony of mutual claims, and it seemed that this dispute could no longer be stopped. But then another voice rang out, deep, firm, full of undeniable power that cut through all the noise, causing everyone to stop talking and turn around. That's enough. All eyes turned to Grandma Elizabeth, who slowly rose from her seat. Her usually kind, gentle face now looked stern, without a drop of the warmth that everyone was used to. I've watched this family fall apart for years, and I won't stand for it anymore, she said, looking around the room, and I felt a tiny spark of hope rise inside me, because for the first time in a long time, one of the elders took my side. Rachel, Cecilio, your treatment of Brigitte was shameful. She turned to my brothers, and they seemed to lose their confidence for the first time. And you too, Grandma continued, and her voice became even firmer, your cruelty towards your sister is inexcusable. An absolute, oppressive silence reigned in the room. For a moment, it even seemed to me that something had changed, that Grandma's words had really struck a chord with them, that they would realize that their behavior was disgusting. But Mom didn't give up that easily. You don't understand, Mom, she spat, not looking Grandma in the eye. Brigitte has always been difficult, always created problems. No, Rachel, Grandma interrupted her. The only problem here is your obvious favoritism and inability to see the damage you've done. I looked around the room, taking in the faces of my relatives, their stunned expressions, the anger on the faces of my parents, and the smug grins of my brothers, who didn't seem to feel even a shadow of remorse. At that moment, something in me broke and immediately reassembled itself, but in a completely different form. "I'm done," I said softly but firmly, and my voice sounded clear in the tense silence. "I'm done trying to earn your approval. I'm done trying to be a part of this toxic family." I turned to Clemente, meeting his gaze, full of determination and the final realization that no blood bond is worth enduring such pain. "We're leaving," I announced, looking straight into my mother's eyes. "And don't try to contact me." The following months were difficult. Clemente was my rock. He held me when I was sad, celebrated even the smallest victories with me, and most importantly, he never once made me feel guilty for finally setting my boundaries and refusing to be disrespected. But life has this weird way of confusing you when you least expect it. It all started with a phone call. Clemente worked tirelessly for several weeks, putting all his strength into an offer for one major client. And when the phone rang that sunny Tuesday morning, I immediately realized from the look on his face that something important had happened. "We did it," he whispered, as if he couldn't believe what he was saying. "Brigitte, we got the contract." The next few months were crazy. Clemente's small design firm suddenly took off. This client opened doors for him that we never even dreamed of. Our lives changed overnight. We no longer made ends meet, but confidently moved towards financial independence. But with the success came something unexpected. My phone started bursting with notifications. Friend requests from family members I'd blocked for a long time. Messages from distant relatives who suddenly wanted to catch up. And then the bell I was afraid of rang. "Brigitte, honey," my mother's voice was sickeningly sweet, like an excess of sugar in tea that constantly tries to stick to your teeth and cause nausea. "We heard great news about Clemente's business. We always knew that you too could do it." I froze, the phone seemed icy in my palm, and the words pouring into the receiver became angrier with each lie. "We are so proud of you." My father chimed in, and I could almost imagine him leaning back complacently in his chair, as if he were the one who worked all night, as if he was the one who was torn between projects and meetings, as if he was the one who built a business from scratch, while Clemente and I teetered on the edge for years, saving every penny. "We'd like to see you," Mom chirped, drawing out the words as if she was getting close to something that really mattered to them. "Maybe we could all have dinner, celebrate your success, as a family." I shuddered. "How's the family?" I repeated, feeling a hot wave of indignation rise in me. "You haven't been my family for a long time, and that's not going to change just because you're suddenly interested in our bank account." I broke the call without giving them a chance to continue this performance. But they didn't stop. A few days later, my parents suddenly appeared on our doorstep. I didn't let them in. They sent expensive gifts. I sent them back without even opening them. They wrote long messages in which they tried to look like caring parents, but I knew the value of their words. They didn't regret the past. They only needed one thing: to suck on our success, as they had done all their lives with the money that poured into the river on my brothers. Instead, Clemente and I focused on building the life we always wanted. We worked tirelessly, we saved wisely, and finally the day came when we signed the documents for the purchase of an apartment in the heart of the city. It was our achievement, our little miracle, and I wanted to share this joy with those who were really there. I posted the photo on a social network, simple, but full of meaning. It shows Clemente and me, beaming, with keys in our hands, standing in front of our new house. Next to it, I added a picture taken during my last visit to Elizabeth's grandmother. Her proud smile shone into the camera. "New beginnings and old love," I signed. I am grateful to those who were there for me. I didn't expect it to cause a storm. The phone exploded with notifications. Likes, comments, messages. and among them, like rotting apples in a basket of ripe fruit, there were those whom I would prefer never to see again. Fedel. Ezeline. The messages were mocking at first, then angry. I ignored them, but as soon as I was distracted for a minute, an aggressive knock on the door resounded through the apartment. Brigida. Fedel's voice was filled with rage. We know you're there. My blood froze. I would have recognized those voices anywhere. Fedel and Ezeline. Before I could react, the door swung open. My brothers entered the room, their faces distorted with malice, and in their eyes, the same gleam that I remembered from childhood. They felt in control of the situation, confident that they could take anything they wanted. You little manipulator, Fedel said, approaching me and pointing angrily at my chest. We always knew you were playing the long game, but this is too low even for you. I recoiled, shocked by the venom in his voice. What are you talking about? Ezeline snorted, his lips curling into an ugly grin. Don't play dumb, Brigida. We saw your post. Apartment, Grandma, your sugary signature. Do you think we can't put 2 and 2 together? I finally realized what they meant. Do you think that Grandma bought us an apartment? There was more surprise than anger in my voice. We know she did it. Fedel snapped. You've been pretending to be a poor abandoned lamb for years, squeezing pity out of her, and now you've manipulated her to become the sole heir, right? I felt a flame burning inside me. You have no idea what you're talking about. Clemente and I bought this apartment ourselves. With the money we've earned. Ezeline rolled his eyes, lazily looking around the room. Of course, he drawled mockingly. Where is the old witch, by the way? Did you hide her so we couldn't talk to her? And then, before I could answer, he said something that made my blood run cold. That crazy old woman is probably already at the cemetery. I can't wait for her to finally die so I can sell her house and live like I'm supposed to. For a moment, there was dead silence in the room, so dense and heavy that it seemed as if the air had thickened, turning into invisible walls that pressed on my chest and prevented me from taking a normal breath. I thought that maybe I had imagined those terrible words, that my tired mind had played a cruel trick on me, that fatigue and tension had distorted reality. But then a quiet, trembling, but extremely clear voice came from the doorway of the guest room. So that's how you really feel about me. All heads turned at the same time, as if on cue, to see Grandma Elizabeth standing there, her frail figure shrouded in the soft light from the hallway, and her face frozen in a mask of shock and disappointment. Her thin, always neatly folded lips were trembling, and there was pain in her eyes, not loud, not violent, but deeply rooted, the one that burns from the inside, leaving only emptiness. The color drained from Fedel and Ezeline's faces when they realized that their grandmother had heard every word, every drop of venom that escaped their lips. For a moment, they froze like 2 puppets whose strings had suddenly snapped, and something like fear flashed in their eyes, not before Grandma, but before the consequences, before they would no longer be able to lie, pretend, manipulate. Grandma. Fedel stammered, nervously licking his dry lips. We didn't mean. But Elizabeth raised her hand, and the gesture, slow, measured, dignified, silenced him immediately, as if the words had stuck in his throat. I've heard enough, she said, her voice low but firm, the kind that only comes from people who have lived a long life and are tired of enduring. I finally realized who really appreciates me, and who sees me as nothing more than a meal ticket. I felt my voice grow stronger, nourished by her presence, as if the very realization that she was standing here, hearing us and no longer blind to what was happening gave me strength. I think you both need to leave now. For a moment, it seemed that they were going to start arguing, that they were going to try to dodge, twist, invent excuses, but one look at Grandma's face, which contained a mixture of pain and determination, seemed to blow away all their arrogance, leaving only 2 pale, confused silhouettes. They stealthily headed for the door, muttering weak excuses, but no one paid any attention to them. When the door closed behind them, silence hung in the air, covering us like a heavy velvet curtain. But the consequences of that crazy evening hit me like a storm. My phone didn't stop buzzing, constantly reminding me of the mess I seemed to have caused by my refusal to put up with their lies. Mom's name popped up on the screen for what seemed like the millionth time. Against my better judgment, I picked up the phone. Brigitte, her voice was harsh, with a hint of cold steel about it, quite unlike the affectionate, enveloping tone she had used before. "You need to fix this." "Fix it?" I repeated, feeling anger boiling up inside. "Your grandmother is furious with guys," she continued, as if she hadn't noticed my tone. "You need to smooth things over. Tell her it's all a misunderstanding." I laughed bitterly. "A misunderstanding?" "They broke into my house and said they couldn't wait for her to die so they could sell her house." "How exactly is this misunderstanding?" There was a deep sigh on the other end of the line, followed by my father's voice, which sounded like the conversation was on speakerphone. "You know how boys can be," he said with the same condescension with which he had once dismissed their cruelty when we were children. "They were just upset." Upset? I couldn't believe my ears. Because of what? Because I challenged their lies? Is it because Clemente and I bought an apartment with our own money? Because Grandma loves me? Mom's voice has become sickeningly sweet again, like sticky syrup that makes your cheekbones ache. "Honey, we know that you've always felt left out, but you need to think about what's best for your family. Your brothers deserve this inheritance. Don't be selfish." Something inside me broke. Years of pent-up frustration and pain poured out like a burst dam that had been reinforced with dilapidated boards and rusty nails for too long. Selfish? My voice was flat, but there was steel in it. Are you calling me selfish after all the years of favoritism? After my achievements were denied? After the way you treated Clemente and me like second-class citizens? And now you have the nerve to demand that I give up an inheritance I didn't even ask for? Brigitte. Dad began, but I interrupted him. "No." I finished. "I'm done with manipulation, with guilt, with all that. Don't call me anymore, don't write, don't show up at my door. We're done here." Over the next few days, I blocked their numbers, just like I blocked Fadila and Ezeline. It was painful, like cutting off a sore limb, but it was necessary to start healing. When the dust settled, I discovered that I was surrounded by a completely different, warm family. Grandma Elizabeth, now fully aware of the family dynamics she had long suspected, has become an even more permanent part of our lives. Aunt Sarah, who had approached me for the first time after the wedding fiasco, was now a frequent visitor to our house. "I always knew you were special, Brigitte," she said, hugging me tightly. "I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you sooner." Other relatives, cousins, distant aunts, and uncles who had witnessed the injustice for years but remained silent, began to reach out to me with messages of support. It was as if the veil had been lifted, allowing a real relationship to blossom where once there had been only commitment. The Clemente family, God bless them, wrapped me in a blanket of unconditional love. His parents, who had long watched from the sidelines as my own family destroyed me, tried their best to make me feel welcome. Clemente and I rushed to set up our new apartment, and every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall was a testament to the life we had built together, a life based on mutual respect, support, and love. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.